Nicole Rogers. Nicole is founder and CEO of Agriprocity. She's passionate about positioning crops as functional food ingredients. She urges farmers and buyers to connect more deeply within supply chains to maximize efficiencies. Nicole has deep sectoral experience in the themes of alternative protein and dairy, personalized nutrition, decentralized processing, and environmental and socially sustainability in agriculture. Floor is yours, Nicole, and we look forward to have a very engaging session with you. Thank you. Nicole, you are on mute in case you are speaking.
Thank you. I was just saying thank you, so you didn't miss anything. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, and yeah, it's true. I'm passionate about all those things. So from my perspective, what I'd love to chat about today, and I don't have a formal presentation prepared because I would love to hear from anyone who's participating also, is to have a general chat about the shift in manufacturing and manufacturing demand and how that can have a positive impact on emerging market crop production. So to start, I'll give you a little background on myself, maybe a little more deeply than you shared, Deepak. I am a farm girl who grew up in Canada, in southwestern Ontario, and I went first to the Middle Eastern market as a government representative for the government of Canada, and learned that agricultural practices are really varied, and there's this great knowledge transfer that can happen. And after that, effectively set up Agriprocity, which was born out of a desire to build more direct supply chains. So a way for a buyer to engage more deeply with farmers and also ensure that what they were securing, generally from a manufacturing perspective from food, was incredibly functional. So functional meaning every time they manufactured a product line, it was very uniform quality output, and their cost economics were easier to manage, things like that. Where my heart lies now is here in Kenya. So I live in Nairobi, and we ended up here as a firm in 2017 working with a foundation, and we believed that we could do, I guess, a better job at helping manufacturers access the ingredients that are here in Kenya. And we chose to, I guess, prove this, so to speak, with an investment. And again, the passion is disrupting food manufacturing as a system, and really believing that emerging markets have all the conditions to make this revolution in the food system super effective and powerful. And what I mean by that is that, small farms, disparate farms, more regenerative production techniques, all of that is more the norm here than, say, in an emerged, scaled up agricultural market. So our hypothesis is that it's a great testing ground to see how we can service that growing demand from consumers to have greater accountability in manufacturing chains in general, but specifically in food manufacturing chains. So yeah, that's a little more deeply into me. I don't know if anybody has any questions. That was a long diatribe, or I'm not sure, Deepak, how you want the flow to go. Is there something that you think the audience specifically would love to know about
Sure.
about manufacturing, food manufacturing, and disruptions in that space?
Sure. So actually, if you see, your expertise has been in ingredients, and actually, your expertise has been in the modern food, I would say that, right? Somebody who talks about alternative protein or plant-based protein, that itself shows that actually we are moving away from I'll say that conventional line. And secondly, coming all the way from UAE to Africa to ensure that, you are able to leverage the value of quality food ingredients, especially grown in a sustainable and regenerative manner. That's very, I'll say that, refreshing, and I would like to appreciate you for that. So my first question around this would be like, how do you see like, Africa, which is being seen typically as like, low productivity continent, right, when it comes to agriculture, but having a huge value where the native ingredients can be grown and which are flavor of the world, right? How do you see that, like, this possibility of scaling it up? Because you are here, that means you are confident it can be scaled up. So we would like to understand the perspective that how do you see it scaling it up, and what are the typical markets you see that like Africa would be able to serve?
Yeah, so let's start at the macro. So the macro demand, as I see it, is that for radical transparency, let's call it, in food chains and food systems, and it starts at manufacturing. So I think what's happened as food supply chains have grown to meet demand, they become more and more centralized. And it's a lot easier to produce one crop purposefully for a dedicated supply chain. So all along that supply chain, you build infrastructure that's incredibly purpose built. It doesn't make sense in a scaled agricultural production approach to process, garlic and carrots in one facility, generally speaking, has been the model. And it's very old-fashioned economics. And it makes sense in manufacturing economics that you focus, you invest in the infrastructure to do more of one thing and do it super efficiently. So I think what makes me really excited about Africa, and I would say all emerging markets that are big agri crop production houses, is the opportunity to not compete with that existing system, but build new systems. So I think when you talk about regenerative agri production or small scale production or decentralizing food chains, there's a lot of investment interest in the US and Europe. But fundamentally, I guess my belief would be it doesn't work in those markets because you have to decentralize the farms first, and those farms have, been built generally around a large central system. And to get them to think about a small 1 acre model, it's just impossible. They've already scaled up to, grow carrots for a Costco, let's say, or somebody big. Whereas like in Kenya, our findings and certainly our modeling has shown that we have this awesome opportunity to find farmers that are producing at a small scale. So the decentralization happened and is happening, and we need to just layer on an awesome processing solution and make it innovative and design it for Africa or for India or for an emerging market where the conditions for small scale production exist, as opposed to being a large food company and coming to Africa or Asia or any emerging market and saying, we're going to build a giant potato puree company and model it off the way it looks in France or the US.
Super. And this is a add-on question to what you just said. When we talk about decentralized processing, right? So that is also having, I'll say that intense investments required, because definitely you would like to move the processing closer to farms. Then only you'll be able to take care of or leverage the value being created by small farmers. Do you see the model of community working here, or do you see it has to be the private enterprise who puts multiple facilities to take care of it?
So we do engage. We have a community engagement model because I think in order for the unit economics to work, you don't have to have like a contiguous smallholder adoption, but it works a lot better if you have a lot of uptake in a certain geography, because you can, build the infrastructure and get a lot of acres on board with greater efficiencies. But from my perspective, I think what we're trying to do is allow a smallholder to manage their own P&L and add value to the crop in a meaningful way so that we can subsidize what would otherwise be deemed an inefficiency of a decentralized model. So we're trying to create a model that you take an input that's really competitively priced in a market like Kenya. So our first supply chain is we're building, or we have built a powder manufacturing facility. So effectively what we're doing is we're working on a regenerative rotation crop cycle. So every farm is selling us a minimum of 4 specific horticulture crops. And then we add value at our facility, our processing facility. And in some cases, we're extracting a flavor profile. We're creating even more premium right on site. So taking an onion and adding heat to make it, taste more smoky, or some other kind of flavor enhancement, let's call it. But our extraction process is super natural and super back to basics. So we're talking about reimagining the whole system. It doesn't have to be a very sophisticated factory, but the output is incredibly high quality, and has such a quality story that you're guaranteeing a better return for the farm. So you can make it possible for them to continue to farm in that small scale way, because we're really like an enabler, let's say, of the individual farm. But for sure, if you get a community of these individuals, it is for sure easier, right? It does make the system better. But we tend to operate on a real private sector model of economics.
Fair enough. Now that brings me to another question, which is, I believe, is relevant to what you just said. Do you see that training to the farmers playing an important role here? Because you are trying to create a high value product that also needs the high value agronomical practices, right? To ensure that you're having a good productivity. At the same time, you minimize the losses, because it's labor of love which is being put in growing every onion, which would be coming to on a platter of really, I'll say that high value purchases. So do you see that that the training playing a very important role and updating farmers about the practices?
So look, I'm a bit controversial in this. This is maybe not what my team and my co-founders would want me to say, but I'm very anti-extension. And maybe it's because I worked in advisory for so long, and I've worked with lots of big groups, not-for-profits, foundations, whose whole goal is to provide these skills. What we rather focus on is certification. And so we're trying to train farmers via meeting certain, markers in terms of, say, soil science or soil quality. So designing a system that works for both the buyer and the farm. So we do a lot of really economical soil monitoring, data capture. It doesn't necessarily need to involve training, but it's like subvert training. So basically, we're teaching the farmer about very basic principles of soil and soil health. We want to see carbon increase, we want to see nitrogen increase, and we want to see a microbiome increase. And so we measure that more qualitatively, but we basically want to show that we have more bugs, more fungi, more worms. We can call them fancy soil science things, but that's really what you want to see. And we can encourage the farmer by having really patient financing terms, and encourage them to have certain rules of conduct, honestly, is how we tend to work it out. So no synthetic pesticides is like one of our rules of conduct. And it's really because we're trying to encourage their soil functionality and their soil fertility and their soil, say, like productivity overall over the long terms. So most of our farmers, we've made a commitment. We're going to source from them for a decade, let's say. And then we wrap it in patient capital, because regenerative farming and smallholding farming, there's so much risk, right? So we as the processor can assume some of that risk, because we can take lower quality. We're not looking for the perfect fresh produce, which is a huge problem for small farmers, in my opinion, especially in markets that don't have good cold chain and other supply chain infrastructure. But as well as, guaranteeing a certain amount of revenue so that a farmer can really look at their own profit and understand what that minimum is each year. It's teaching them that their farms becomes more valuable because their soil is their asset, right? So I guess in a way, I'm saying I'm contradicting myself, because all that is training, but it's very, it's not overt training. It's training that has a very closed loop of like benefit, mutual benefit, right? So we're doing it because we want our crops at a certain price and we want a guaranteed minimum. And we want to be able to share an environmental story from a marketing perspective. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, precisely.
it's not extension.
No, precisely. In fact, like, I love the way actually you are creating incentive mechanism for people to be like, I'll say that cajoled into doing things rather than telling them doing something. And as you rightly, I also agree, though I'm not a big hater of extension service, right? I won't be that controversial. What I believe is that unfortunately the structure of extension service is to push farmer do things, right? Whether it was 1960s, 70s, 90s. I don't want to name what events happened there because that would be making me controversial, right?
It's
Now
true.
those have been. I'll say that every time the farmer has been told, if you do this, you'll make more money. But that never happened. And now we are sitting in 2020, and now we are giving one more. Now this I can always speak because I'm part of that industry. I can take that liberty that we give carrot of like we digitize and you'll again make more money, right? How far it is gonna
Totally.
go, right?
Totally.
So I like the model which, and I'll be following you more vigorously to see actually where it goes, so that it can be replicated
and
in a yeah. Please.
this is the hope, honestly speaking, and why I moved here as a foreigner. Because I have a Kenyan co-founder, so that was highly motivating. But what was really motivating was to build a process. The process is the hardware. You actually need a brick and mortar facility to certify within, but the process is also the disruption, right? And if these processes and new systems for getting calories, flavor, everything out of fields in small farms, if we don't harness that, if we don't really truly create a system that is by an emerging market for emerging markets, we're never going to get it right. You can never have someone who pops in to the market as an expert, who also sells inputs, who also sells seeds, who also does all these things. It's very difficult. And what I found always when I was working here in an advisor or an investor capacity is the power of the input dictates the program. And I think what we've done really effectively is find like a mutually beneficial relationship with our farms and educate them. We're like, look, if your microbiome is good, we're going to sell more of your crop. It's going to taste better. Everything will be better. So don't just grow a tomato because you were told to grow a tomato. Think about what you feel has traditionally grown in your soils, and we then find a better market opportunity too. And generally everything we're sourcing tastes better, like 1,000%. But what's been really curious is how much of a higher nutritional content we get. So there's this, we're like selling ingredients, but we're almost selling a microbiome story. Because, if you have a scaled agricultural project in California, which we've done direct tests of certain crops like kale, we actually see, a quality proposition from a market like Kenya that you can't compare. You can't argue the science of what is in that leaf once you dehydrate it. And so we're a dual company from a product development standpoint. We have a US product development team and we have a Kenyan product development team. And that's strategic because the US team is really great at the flavor extraction side, understanding how to sell kale powder to, snack food manufacturer. And there's like a different sense. And what the Kenyan team is really good at is figuring out all the labor hacks. Like, okay, in New Mexico, it's quite expensive to char onions. It's like a pretty involved process. It's actually quite cheap in Kenya. Dehydration is a lot cheaper in Kenya. So yeah, we kind of have found a way to sell this to the farm in saying that we're really committed to nutrition and flavor, and you have to do a good job farming. Because if you don't, you can't create that profile for us. But what's pretty cool is that they have a moat around them as a small
Mm.
farm, because the way you make your food taste good is you have to grow lots of crops on 1 acre. Like the more you
True.
rotate, the more you do some natural practices, the less pests you have to fight with synthetic pesticides. I mean, the better your food tastes, the better your crops taste. There's no arguing it. We've seen it in our trials. It's really remarkable. And what a moat for emerging market farmers, because they're just doing what they already did. We don't need to train them.
True.
We just need to create rules.
True, true. No, I fully agree. Like, see the taste of tomatoes, right? Past 8 or 10 years, right? From such a flavory, like, vegetable, it has become like, just I'll say that something which fills your refrigerator because it gives color and it gives you feel of that it is a tomato, right?
That's
So
not
I
good.
strongly believe that we have to move back to like, getting the taste in our food, and just not taste. Actually, it is very important. Also, there are a lot of factors which foods give us, like immunity, right? Currently the food we eat, it like hardly giving immunity. And again, this could be controversial, maybe, like we are having so many pandemics because we are eating something which is definitely not helping our bodies to become better, right? And now that
So
brings
true.
me to, yeah, that brings me to another question, which is like, it's I believe, because when we talk about alternative proteins, right?
Mm.
Suddenly you'll be seeing that there is a lot of shift in demand, right? Which currently
Hmm.
3% of our crops being in protein or protein related crops being grown. Suddenly in next 4 to 5 years, it is predicted that 10% would be requiring protein. Do you see again people taking that same industrial agriculture route to that, or do you see that like in this time we would be smarter of not doing what we did with cereals?
Hmm. Look, I love sharing analogies. I think most people love analogies. So let me answer that with an analogy. So I think that the plant-based market is trying to showcase how healthy it is, right? It's a very healthy choice. And so there's been a huge flurry of new product development to capture this health trend. I think largely it's like for like. So a non-fish fish stick kind of has the same ingredient makeup as a fish stick. So everybody kind of raced. The innovation was in the isolate and less in the product development. And, kind of all the same dirty label things are on there. You've got synthetic flavors, natural flavors that are derivatives and so far removed from what was the actual pure ingredient. And then you've got some really traditional, important functional food ingredients like maltodextrin. So we've been working and doing a lot of focus groups because ultimately our processing chains are quite simple right now to prove, but the goal will be to make them more complex and harness again all these raw crop inputs and figure out ways to make a more back to basics extraction approach work. And so maybe like 6 companies we've spoken to in the last month are exporting an alternative protein manufactured product and being basically not listed in some of the major retailers in the US because of very, very, I would call them prolific functional food ingredients like maltodextrin. And when you speak to a food scientist or a food developer, they say, I mean, crazy. They say that doesn't make any sense because that product is the same. There is nothing about that ingredient makeup that is different than a fish stick or something that's already listed in the store. But what you take from that is that as a category, retailers, and who knows who else, this is just a retail example, are taking a stand that these have to be clean products. It's not the Food and Drug Regulatory authorities that are doing it. And so how interesting that as a category, it has the opportunity to transform the whole space because these are ingredients that have been in food products for like 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, right? And if, new products created with a plant-based, I guess, call it a value proposition, are not going to be allowed, like are being kind of excluded, it's super curious, right? Like for what's going to happen. And yeah, we've heard it now multiple times. So, there's going to be this sub-regulation for plant-based products, manufactured food products, that retailers are going to be really strict on and say, you as a manufacturer, we're holding you to a higher standard than your competitors. It's wild. It's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And now that's bring us to the last section, where let's talk a little bit about women, right? I would like to understand from you, like, you are an entrepreneur who have worked in UAE, right? You have worked in Africa, right? And you have worked in North America. Now, what do you see, like, the change in the mindset or change in the opportunities, where we see far more women entrepreneurs in agriculture domain, predominantly from America, then a little bit from Europe, and nearly nothing from UAE and Africa.
So it's funny, like, this is a bit controversial maybe, but my personal experience is the most sexism I ever felt as a female entrepreneur in the sector is, I would say, always from a North American perspective. There's a belief, the only time I think I'm taken seriously is when I give a background of my family and where I'm from and like what my dad did and what my grandfather did and a legacy. Then there's more of a belief that we are, I have the credibility. But generally speaking, when you're trying to sell or work with groups in North America, there's an inherent bias about a female ability. And what I found really interesting too, is being a woman living in the Middle East, they were also very skeptical if I had the ability to execute on the other side. So the feeling of like this bias that in the Middle East, women are not really able to do business, or women are not really able to execute deals. It was super like a double sexism. Here in Africa, we're a 4 female founder team. And super diverse. So I have an Indian co-founder, I have an African co-founder, and I have an American co-founder, and I'm Canadian. And I think what I would encourage female entrepreneurs in the space is to really sell your capabilities as women. Like, the way we have built this business is very different than others. And we get opportunities that we wouldn't get if we were a four male founder team. And it's okay. Like, I'm not ashamed of taking the opportunities and pursuing the opportunities, like applying for things that are really specifically for female-led companies. We sell it. We see it as something like we lead everything with the fact that we're all women. And it really resonates too, because for our factory number 1, we hired only women. And we were also each of their first job. They'd never, ever been employed, because when you're in rural Kenya, there isn't a lot of job opportunity. You can be casual, you can do things day to day, but, and they trusted us instantly because we were female. To the earlier speaker's point, female to female exchange in agri is super powerful. And most of the horticultural grown in sub-Saharan Africa is by women. It's resoundingly a female portion of farming. So yeah, like, I think if you're a female with an idea, like, honestly, call me, because like, I would love to help. And I help a lot of Kenyan entrepreneurs that are female only. I'm like super paying it back, because I think, yeah, it's your time. I think you'll get more help and more support. And yeah, I think it's brilliant, honestly.
Good to know the girl power you have created, and wish you all the best. And thanks a lot for a very candid chat. And I believe, like, it would ensure, like, a lot of fire is being ignited across Africa by seeing that, like, the strength of being women can also be a very big positive when it comes to agriculture. So thanks, Nicole, a lot for participating in Women in Agriculture Web Summit. Look forward to meet you in Kenya and see the great work you're doing in coming days.
Always,
thanks a lot.
Always welcome. Take care,
Cheers.
Deepak. Have a great day.
Thanks.